Hello, welcome to Old News. It's just the museum's webcast where you get to learn about new discoveries from the field of paleontology. My name is Laura Beth, and I'm going to be your host today. So I'm going to keep an eye on our chat and make sure that we catch and answer all of your questions. So with me today to share the news is the museum's research curator of paleontology, Dr. Christian Kammerer. Hello, Christian.
Hi, Laura Beth. Great to see you again.
Hey, it's
Yeah,
good to
it's
see
been a
you
while.
too. Yeah, I know, about 2 months at least. How
Yeah,
are you
well,
doing?
things have been a bit crazy, but I'm doing okay.
Yeah. So I'm assuming, since you have news for us, that research has not stopped completely.
Yeah, that's right. So,
Yeah.
we're not in the field anymore. We're not in the lab right now. But paleontology, it's a protracted process research, so it can take years from the discovery of a fossil to its preparation, study, analyses about it, and publication.
Right.
Um, so there are hundreds of papers continuing to come out. Even after you submit a paper, there's usually like 6 month or so turnaround, depending on the journal, before it comes out. So there's still a lot
Hmm.
of research that like was basically finished up last year that is only being made public right now. And so there'll be no shortage of interesting studies even into the next few months.
Hmm. Wow. So has any part of that process actually sped up now that people are at home? Like, is there more time to
Um,
review papers?
well, it depends on how much time they have. Like if you're dealing with kids at home now, you might have less time to review papers. But
Right.
yeah, for some of us, I think a lot of projects on the back burner that like we never quite had time to get around to. Now it's like, well, we've got nothing else to do, so let's finish writing up that paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, my productivity in terms of paper output has gone up in the past week, although, I'm not doing any of my usual museum duties of handling visitors and tours and, adding
Right.
specimens to the collection and stuff like that. So yeah, just some shifts in the priorities for our work.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that paleontologists can still get some research done even at home, because I think you have some exciting stuff to share with us today. What's new,
Yeah,
Christian?
yeah, absolutely. So today I'm going to be talking about some dinosaur eggs and babies, um, and
And
particularly
is
some. Yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say particularly some that were found in this site behind me, where
Hmm.
I unfortunately am not actually here. This is at a road cut in South Africa, where
Uh-huh.
some very cool dinosaur eggs that we're going to talk about were found. I've been to this site in the past. I was actually planning on going back to this area this year, but that trip unfortunately is canceled. But hope
Right.
to be back there in the future. But yeah, the site of actually quite a number of discoveries of dinosaur eggs, including some with embryos.
So is that a common thing for paleontologists to find, the dinosaur eggs?
So intact dinosaur eggs are very rare, and
Hmm.
eggs with embryos are like vanishingly rare. Like very, very few are known. Um,
Right.
din- Dinosaur egg shell is more common, like little fragments of shell, if you know where to look
Hmm.
and are looking at, very fine grained sediments. They're
Hmm.
often found together with like isolated teeth from lizards and crocodiles and like fish scales, what we
Hmm.
call microsites, which is where there's a lot of very tiny fossils all together that you usually
Right.
just like you don't find them isolated in the field. What you'll do is you'll just sample like tons of loose sediment like dirt or gravel or something and
Hmm.
screen wash it and then just go through and laboriously pick out all the little fossil bits.
And
So
then
you
just get
usually,
really excited when you find a shell fragment. I mean,
well,
I'm assuming
well,
that's
yeah,
kind of
that,
exciting.
yeah, that sort of stuff maybe not so much. Like in
Yeah.
ideally, you want to find like a mammal tooth or part of a jawbone or something.
Okay. Things that give you more
But yeah,
information.
yeah, something that is very sort of like diagnostic to species.
Okay.
But there is a lot that can be done with eggshell. You can look at its microstructure, you can look at sections of it. But
Hmm.
it only goes so far. And ideally you want like a whole intact egg and even better embryos. And like I said, yeah, those are pretty rare. In
Hmm.
fact, they were not discovered. Dinosaurs have been known since the 1830s. But intact dinosaur eggs were first discovered in nests in the 1920s in Mongolia, famous localities like the Flaming Cliffs, as part of the Central Asiatic Expedition. And in fact, I can pull up a picture here. I'll show you what those nests look like.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I can see the eggs.
You got it there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that is one of the first dinosaur nests that was ever found. And like I said, they were collected in Mongolia in late Cretaceous sediments, surrounded by lots of fossils of this animal called Protoceratops, whose skull looks like that. Protoceratops is an early member of the sort of the frilled dinosaurs. It's related to better known horned dinosaurs like Triceratops from later in the Cretaceous. It's a fairly small, somewhat primitive member of this group, but it's by far the most commonly found dinosaur fossil in these deposits in the Gobi Desert. And they also found juvenile and maybe even some like infant Protoceratops bones associated in this area where the eggs were found. So the assumption was that these nests belonged to Protoceratops. And for the longest time, this was the sort of image of Protoceratops life, is you had these animals living in these sand dunes in, the Cretaceous, the Gobi Desert, and laying eggs in these nests. And at the time, it was thought that they had like a very reptile-like system of reproduction. The argument being that they would just basically lay their eggs, cover them with sand, and then abandon them like sea turtles do today. That's not an entirely fair representation of all reptiles. There are reptiles living today that do practice parental care, but this was part of a generalized view of dinosaurs as very reptilian creatures, like, cold-blooded, sluggish, not very socially active. And that was really the dominant view of dinosaur biology for much of the 20th century. One last thing to note about these Gobi eggs, these nests, was there was another dinosaur found quite close to the nest that was named Oviraptor. And this is a theropod dinosaur that looks like that, or at least, was historically thought to look like that. We now know there's some differences. And it was interpreted as sort of this like sneaking, thieving creature that would rob eggs from Protoceratops nests, and it would eat the eggs. So the name Oviraptor in Latin means egg thief. And this was, a somewhat malicious creature that's coming in and stealing the offspring of poor Protoceratops there. So that was for a long time the main view of dinosaur eggs and reproduction. Things changed quite a bit in the 80s and 90s based on new discoveries of sort of new types of dinosaurs, new nests. So, for example, in Montana in the late Cretaceous at a site called Egg Mountain, this animal called Maiasaura was found. So this is a duck-billed dinosaur. This is a hadrosaur, and the Montana localities actually have a huge range of sizes and ages of Maiasaura. So adult Maiasaura, it's a big duck-billed dinosaur. It's in the 30-foot range. But there were found eggs, hatchlings, little infant Maiasaura, sort of juveniles, things sort of in the teenage range. And so this was, reinterpreting dinosaurs as very social animals, as, good parents. So Maiasaura, the name means good mother lizard. And this was particularly popularized in sort of a series of children's books and VHSs showing, Maiasaura raising its offspring, tending to nests, feeding its babies, things that are more associated with birds today, dinosaur descendants, than they are, more traditional reptilian view of dinosaurs. And Laura Beth, do you have a little Maiasaura there that I see?
I do. I pulled it out of hiding. It's now sitting with my T-Rex. Yeah, so this is
Watch out.
Maiasaura.
Yeah, so that's what the adult Maiasaura would have looked like. So a little horn on the nose, but otherwise fairly typical duck-billed dinosaur morphology.
And then here's a model of their nest. So
yeah, so the sites at Egg Mountain they're so rich and full that we actually have a pretty good idea of how these animals would have been nesting. So they would have had these broad, relatively shallow, concave, earthen nests, so made of the surrounding sediment, and then filled with some sort of vegetable matter, and then with the eggs in there.
And Christian, I don't want to throw us off track too much, but do we have any idea why they might have laid their eggs and made nests in big groups? Because you said that Protoceratops did the same thing, right?
Yeah, so a lot of dinosaur nests are found in association with other nests.
Mm-hmm.
And this is across a series of different species. So like Maiasaura does it. There's a famous site that was discovered not too long ago, maybe within the past 10 years in Argentina, called Alcamahuevo, which is a site for titanosaurs, which are some of the biggest long-necked sauropod dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And they found, I think dozens, if not hundreds, of nests at those sites. So there are not too many animals today that have this sort of nesting behavior. But those that do, sometimes it is to split up parenting duties between different individuals so that some can go out and forage while others can stay on the nest. You have things like some birds, like ostriches, that you can have different mothers laying eggs in single, very large nests. And so parents are, basically, just splitting up parenting duties. You can also have, like, for some big animals, communal nests can help to guard against predators. So if all the nests are in the same place, you have more individuals ready to, send a leopard seal or a lion or something that might be threatening the nest out of there, or more eyes on the ground to look for smaller egg thieves like weasels or snakes or something like that. So it's possible that any or all of these things may have also underlain communality of dinosaur nesting.
Mm-hmm.
But also, there may be some bias to the preservation as well. So sites that have a lot of nests together are more likely to be found by paleontologists because there's more egg material that might be exposed at the surface. So there may well have been dinosaurs that had, just one nest, no shared behavior there. But the likelihood of one, it being preserved, and two, of we paleontologists seeing the remains of that one nest on the surface are lesser.
Right, right. And so, a paleontologist is probably more likely to know what they're looking at, right? If they find a nest or like an egg just kind of poking out of the surface, right? So someone like me, I might see that and just think it's a rock, an average rock.
Yeah, I mean, it's the dinosaur eggshell has a very distinctive shape and sort of texture to it. So it is very porous. It looks like, some of them are wrinklier than modern bird eggs. They're different shapes from modern bird eggs. They're usually more sort of elongate, more sort of like stretched out oval. Actually, I think you have a model of dinosaur egg there?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so that's a typical dinosaur egg shape, at least for theropods. They have this very long type of eggs. But dinosaur eggs, they come in a lot of different shapes. There are also some that are more spherical. Some of the big sauropods had more spherical eggs. There's quite a diversity there. But yeah, the texture of the egg is pretty diagnostic. So if you know what to look for, it's not hard to find. With that said, like, every round thing that you find in the ground is not a dinosaur egg. That's one of the questions I get most when people ask me to identify things that they have found, which is one of my duties as paleontologist at the museum. And always happy to talk to folks who found fossils. But a lot of times, people have just a sort of a round thing that they found in their yard, and it's mostly like inorganic nodules or metamorphic crystals or something like that. I have yet to see someone just bring me a full dinosaur egg because they're very rare.
You've challenged our viewers now. Everyone is going to go searching for a dinosaur egg just to bring it to you.
I honestly don't think I mean, never say never. I don't think they'll be found, at least here in North Carolina, just because of the nature of how dinosaur fossils are found in this state, where they're all they're mostly deep underground and they're washed out by river action. And in doing so, that breaks up even like big dinosaur bones into little fragments. And what you mostly find are bone fragments and teeth. Something as delicate as an egg, where you really need to find it in situ in order to have it intact. There's no way it's going to survive, even if they're buried down there somewhere, being transported, 100 miles along the Tar River. You're never going to get something like that.
Right.
So yeah, so I am doubtful, but would love to be proven wrong on that point.
That's great.
But getting back to the sort of history of dinosaur eggs, so we can get to the news as well. In the 80s, you have this shift from understanding dinosaurs as, very reptilian type animals to more bird-like animals. And Maiasaura is part of that, but also then in the 90s, scientists went back to those famous Mongolian localities that the supposed Protoceratops eggs were found in, and they found new eggs and new nests, but some of them with embryos still preserved inside the eggs. But it turns out that Protoceratops was not what was in those nests. So if you look at what's actually being found inside those eggs, so we've got a little egg with embryonic bone visible there, and the animal inside it is Oviraptor and its close relatives, the Oviraptorids. Furthermore, Oviraptorid skeletons, like this big one here, affectionately nicknamed Big Mama, were found on top of the nests, not stealing from them, but brooding them. So it turns out that rather than the egg thief, Oviraptor is the actual parent of these supposed Protoceratops eggs, and it was actually brooding and caring for its offspring rather than, stealing and eating eggs from other dinosaurs. And so now Oviraptor is a very bird-like dinosaur, and now it's believed actually that it was resting and that it would have been feathered and may even have had its wings over the nest in order to warm them up and guard them a lot like birds do today. Yeah, actually, can you show that? You've got a model there to show what the Oviraptor on its nest may have looked like. Yeah, so there's this animal, City Potty, which is a close relative, and Con, which is another one, and Oviraptor itself, all associated with these sorts of elongate oval eggs. And in all cases, those it seems like they are caring for their nests, which does leave open the question of what Oviraptor actually ate, because they have these very weird beaks with only two little tooth protrusions in there, and we still don't know, but probably not eggs.
That's crazy. I would think we would know by now what the Oviraptor is eating. And actually, I think you're going to get to this, but someone had a question. Jonathan has a question. Are dinosaurs born with teeth? So especially talking about Oviraptors, since they actually found those embryos, do you know if they had the teeth?
Yes. So actually, well, this is a great segue to bring us to the news of the week. So dinosaurs are, for the most part, born with teeth. So when a dinosaur hatches, like a lot of reptiles today, that is something that's reptilian about them. They do have teeth already there, if it's a dinosaur that had teeth at all. So some dinosaurs are toothless, like ornithomimid dinosaurs, for instance. But if they had teeth when they were born, they had teeth erupted. So reptiles, they have an interesting pattern of how they grow their teeth. It's not like us mammals. So we only get 2 sets of teeth in our lifetime. We have our baby teeth, and then those fall out, and we have the adult teeth, and that's all we ever get. So brush your teeth, take good care of them, because that's all you'll ever have. Whereas reptiles, they replace teeth throughout their life, basically. So they're a lot like sharks and fish, other earlier diverging vertebrates. Is when a tooth falls out, a new one just grows in to replace it. And so that's true for dinosaurs. That's true for crocodiles, lizards, all these groups. But the teeth that they have when they're born are called the generation 1 teeth, and because that's the first teeth they have as
The
emerged
first
hatched
set.
animals. But if you look at embryos of reptiles, they also have what's called the null generation. So null meaning zero, which is basically their tooth buds, sort of like baby steps, them figuring out how to develop teeth. So they're little non-functional teeth that erupt or are formed, at least. Sometimes they don't erupt from the gum line while the embryo is still inside the egg. And so this null generation teeth of teeth it grows and then it's absorbed by the gums, and then basically the real generation 1 teeth start to develop. And so that's known in reptile embryos today, but historically was not known in dinosaurs until this new discovery. So let me bring this up. Of an animal called Maiasaura. So Maiasaura is one of the best known members of a group called Protoceratops or basal sauropodomorphs. So these include the ancestors of the largest dinosaurs that ever lived, the long-necked sauropods, things like, from the Jurassic, like Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus, and the Cretaceous titanosaurs, things that can get, over 100 feet long, just gigantic multi-ton herbivores. The prosauropods were generally smaller. I mean, they're still, big-ish, like Maiasaura, it can get like 10 feet long, but they're not giants. They were also much sort of lighter bodied than the sauropods. So a lot of them were bipedal, like you can see in Maiasaura here. And Maiasaura is a great animal to study, actually, because it's one of the best known prosauropods. It's known from hundreds of specimens from southern Africa, mostly from South Africa and Lesotho, in the earliest Jurassic, so just on sort of either edge of the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. For whatever reason, this animal, Maiasaura, was extremely common. And it's known not only from like good adult skeletons, but also from juveniles, from hatchlings, and most incredibly from lots and lots of eggs with embryos in them. So this is not the only prosauropod for which newborns or eggs have been discovered. There's an animal in Argentina called Musaurus that has infants known. There's also an animal called Lufungosaurus from China that has eggs and babies known. But the biggest sample of these things is in Maiasaura, and also some of the best preservation. And this animal is the eggs, at least, are known from this wonderful series of clutches of nests in what, from my mind, is actually one of the most beautiful places in the world, which is Golden Gate Highlands National Park, which is a relatively high elevation site on the border between South Africa and Lesotho. And you can see there that sandstone in the back, that's Clarence Formation, that's early Jurassic, that has yielded dinosaur fossils. It's underlain by this red rock, which is the Elliott Formation, which also yields a lot of dinosaur fossils, including these Maiasaura eggs and embryos. So actually, this is a photograph when I was visiting the site. Was lucky enough to get to go there actually with some of the authors of this new research back in 2018. And there are still eggs coming out of this locality. So in the future, if we can dig in through the cliffside, they're working on building an interpretive center there. I think there's the potential for a lot more Maiasaura eggs to be found. But in the meantime, like most of the new research was being done on eggs that were collected a few years ago. One clutch actually was first found in 1976, and more have been found since then. But the new work was done by Chappelle et al. In a paper that just came out in the past month, looking at the cranial anatomy of these Maiasaura embryos using CT scans. So CT has been, a hugely transformative technology for paleontologists. Has made it so much easier to study very fine scale internal detail that previously, we never could have seen because we just would have destroyed these sorts of like tiny fossils, or couldn't get inside the brain case or things like that. But what Chappelle et al. Did was they reconstructed the skull of the embryonic Maiasaura and compared it to developing skulls of modern reptiles and birds. So looking at chickens, looking at crocodiles, looking at turtles. And they found a few interesting things. One is that these Maiasaura skulls did have the null generation teeth. So those are only found relatively early in development, like between halfway, maybe 60% through the way of incubation in modern reptiles. So this indicates that these Maiasaura embryos are actually the earliest record of any dinosaur in terms of its development. So this is the youngest dinosaur that we know of. This is relatively early embryo. Previously, it was thought that like all dinosaur embryos were almost like ready to hatch, because if they were able to be preserved at all, they must be ossified enough to be about to hatch. But this shows that actually these animals were quite a ways yet from hatching. Any earlier than this, and they're probably not going to preserve just because their skeletons are still cartilaginous. But these Maiasaura embryos were really just beginning to ossify. And so that tells us not only about, we now basically have a complete understanding of how Maiasaura grew, but it also tells us about sort of the evolution of this group, because there's a very common process in evolutionary history called heterochrony, which basically just means shifts in the rate of development. So very common thing is like pedomorphosis, which is where adults of descendant species look more like the babies of ancestor species. So an example you might be familiar with among animals today is the axolotl, this salamander that's originally from central Mexico, where the adults look like larvae. They still have their gills, they still live totally in the water, they still have big flipper tails, even though they're the same genus as things like the tiger salamander that look like normal adult salamanders. So that's an example of heterochrony. But also just like at large levels in evolutionary history. So for example, the sauropod dinosaurs are quadrupedal, these prosauropods are bipedal. But it seems at least some of the prosauropods, although probably not Maiasaura, had quadrupedal babies. Are sauropods sort of like, becoming more baby-like through their evolution, with shorter skulls and, retaining that quadrupedal size to adulthood? We don't know, but it's, these are the sort of questions that this data really bears on. And it's funny to think that like the biggest land animals of all time might be, baby-like, but that's another aspect of heterochrony, is it can be very variable across the anatomy of an animal. You can have a very baby-like head and still be 100 feet long. So that's just sort of the mosaic of how evolution operates.
Right. So for some reason there would have been an evolutionary advantage to them, preserving this baby form even as they grow larger and larger. I know that's the case for the axolotl, right? So it has to do with, what kind of habitat they have to live in, right? If it's not safe for them to go out of the water, at least with tiger salamanders, they can do the same thing, the pedomorphy.
Yep.
So yeah, if the land is not safe for them to go on, then they'll just kind of stay in their larval form and remain in the water. So they think that
exactly.
Something similar was happening with the dinosaurs, at least the sauropods.
Yeah, well, I mean, in that case, you can imagine if it's difficult to be a biped at very large size. Certainly some dinosaurs have done it, like theropods. T-Rex is a very large dinosaur, absolutely bipedal. There's no way it's walking around on its, famously tiny forelimbs. But if you, like, for the most part, big, especially herbivorous animals are quadrupedal. And even groups like duck-billed dinosaurs that are often shown standing on two legs, the biggest ones probably were quadrupeds. They may have been like facultatively bipedal, like able to rear up and maybe run away on their hind limbs, but in their day-to-day activity, they probably would have been spending most of it on four legs. And the sauropods almost certainly were walking around almost exclusively on four legs. There's some debate among paleontologists whether they could like rear up to, reach higher in the trees or fight one another or fight predators. But 99% of the time they are on all four legs.
Mm-hmm.
And just like dealing with supporting such massive bodies, you need to have all four on the ground. So as more resources are available for these things in the Jurassic, as ecosystems stabilize after the extinction, these sauropods are becoming the dominant herbivores. They're getting bigger in size, which is a common sort of trajectory in herbivorous groups, increase in body size through time. They're needing to support greater weight. How do you do that? You become quadrupedal. What's the easiest way to do that is to co-opt existing parts of your development. And so animals that are staying on four legs, maybe longer in their individual history, have an advantage over those that aren't. So that's just one hypothesis, one possibility to explain that. But there are, like I said, it's a mosaic of features that are being acted on and selected upon simultaneously to sort of throughout the evolution of these groups.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's super interesting. Definitely makes me question the evolution of birds from the theropod group. It sounds like we don't know as much about the embryos, from those types of groups, except maybe the oviraptors. But I want to get to everyone's questions because we have some really good questions here in the chat. So
all right, let's get on to it.
All right. So Eric wants to know, are most fossils discovered by accident or by deliberate prospecting?
So it's a good combination of both. So for professional paleontologists, when they're in the field, there is a huge amount of effort that goes into planning to make sure that the rocks we're going to look at are likely fossiliferous, all the experience that goes into being a paleontologist to know what to look for fossils. So when we set up an expedition, like we intend to go out and find, fossils at a specific site. And yeah, those largely intentional. But, of course, there are plenty of happy accidents in the course of paleontological work too. Like if I could rattle off a very long list of very important fossil discoveries that were made when someone left sort of prospecting the main field site and ran off to use the bathroom in, some, otherwise unoccupied part of the landscape and look down to see a beautiful fossil there. And the same is true for discoveries by amateur paleontologists or sort of hobbyist fossil collectors. There are people who absolutely know like where they're going, what they're doing. There are famous localities like here in North Carolina. There are beaches where if you want to find shark's teeth, like you can, which places to look for.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also by amateurs, there's a ton of really important discoveries that are totally random. Some of the best specimens we have in our collections are like there's a giant sloth that was found just while a person was working on improvements to their property of trying to build a drainage ditch on their property and cut through a bunch of ground sloths.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, especially on the East Coast where there's very little hard rock exposed at the surface. A lot of accidental discoveries in mines, in quarries, along road cuts, especially after making new bridges or cutting through a mountain or something. A lot of the best East Coast fossils were found in those sorts of like circumstantial situations. So yeah, it's definitely both.
Okay. And let's see. So Anne wants to know, and I believe Anne is asking this question in regards to the large fossil sites where there are a lot of nests all together.
Okay.
Is there a case of fossilization where there's one big event that happens and everything is fossilized at once, or I should say everything dies at once? Is it because of a big event, kind of like Pompeii?
I mean, there certainly are mass death assemblages of that kind. Like some of the like there's an almost exact equivalent of Pompeii, which is Ashfall National Monument, which is a site in the U.S. Of not dinosaurs but Cenozoic mammals that was near an active volcano, and all the animals were basically killed standing up by being covered by pyroclastic flow, by volcanic ash.
Wow.
And there's some really like evocative specimens, some like fossils that kind of make you sad because it's a rhino that is preserved with its neck like stretched upwards as it's desperately trying to breathe over this,
Oh,
increasing layer of superheated
yeah.
ash. So yeah, there are examples like that. The famous feathered dinosaur sites in China in Liaoning are also associated with some volcanics. Um, a lot of the fossils there were probably just animals that died in lakes and through normal processes and then were covered later on by ash. But there may be
Hmm.
some actual ash fall mass death assemblages as well. For the most part, the dinosaur egg discoveries are not mass death assemblages. There are some that might be. For the Gobi dinosaurs, it has been argued at least that some of them are the result of sand dune collapse. So these are in Aeolian sediments, so very sandy sediments. And some of them actually may have been quite gigantic dunes, similar to the great ergs in the Sahara and Namib deserts today, where through wind action or just through the sand dune like localized collapse, part of the dune would just flop over and suffocate animals on the nest. There's a famous uh, there's a famous specimen called the fighting dinosaurs, which seems to preserve a Protoceratops locked in deadly combat with Velociraptor, where the two specimens are intertwined. And it's been argued that they were fighting and a sand dune fell on them. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, so there are certainly catastrophic means of preserving fossils, but for the
Hmm.
most part, it's just animals dying and falling over and then being covered in mud or sand.
Hmm. Okay, so we have so many good questions here. It's hard to choose. Maybe if you can give us some like a quick, we're gonna do like a rapid fire Q&A with these because they're also about fossilization and
Okay,
general dinosaur questions. Okay, how many fossils have been found with preserved soft parts like the skin and the guts?
uh, a very very small proportion of the total numbers of fossils that have been found, but still thousands of fossils. So like there are
Okay.
a lot of fossils known. Like in the aforementioned like Liaoning beds in China alone, there are thousands of like fossil birds known with feathers. Um, there are sites like Messel, which is a Cenozoic locality in Germany, that almost every fossil there has some of the skin, some of the guts preserved at least as impressions, if not necessarily the original organics.
Hmm.
So mostly they're super rare. There are a few sites worldwide called Lagerstätten that generally preserve soft tissue. So if you find one of those, you're very lucky, and you might find hundreds of amazing fully preserved things with the skin and everything. But
Great.
finding those sites is vanishingly few.
Hmm. Yeah, okay, so it happens, but very rare. And you actually answered the next question, which was how do we know that some dinosaurs had feathers? And yeah, so you said sometimes the actual feathers will preserve,
Yes,
right? But
absolutely.
but sometimes it's just impressions.
Yeah, so for the most part, they're impressions of the feathers. There has been some work showing that some of the keratin associated with feathers is preserved, or imprints of like things like the melanosomes, which are the little organelles that make up and color the feathers. There's also indirect evidence for feathers in dinosaurs. So, for example, Velociraptor, we know had feathers, but there's no Velociraptor skeleton preserved with skin or with feathers or anything like that. But on its arm, it has a series of quill knobs, which are exactly the same as if you like look in a turkey or a chicken or any other ground bird today. Um, those are the knobs on the bone that are associated with the really big wing feathers. Um, and so they don't attach to the bone, but there is sort of a loose connective tissue connection to these knobs and the very biggest feathers.
Hmm.
So we know that Velociraptor had feathers on its arms, on its wings, if you want to call them that. And there are a lot of other dinosaurs that would have had like big bird-like wing feathers, and then others just had sort of like little shaggy fuzz sort of stuff on them. Yeah, T-Rex. T-Rex, we don't know.
Yeah.
There's no feathers preserved on T-Rex, but T-Rexes the ancestors of T-Rex we know did have feathers because there are much earlier Tyrannosauroids, which is the group that includes Tyrannosaurus and its relatives, from China that have preserved feathers on their body, but they are the more like shaggy hair-like kind. They don't have proper wings.
Yeah. All right, that's so interesting. I didn't know that about the Velociraptor, the feather knobs. Very cool. So why are they called dinosaurs?
So dinosaur is a Greek word. It means terrible lizard. It was coined by Sir Richard Owen in the 1840s, who was a famous British anatomist sort of the Victorian era. And he named them that. So the Greek term, like terrible, we think of things like T-Rex or Allosaurus or these big predators that might actually like frighten us. But in the if you translating it from the original ancient Greek, it more means like awesome, like the direct translation. So like it is worthy of awe, and that's because these were the largest reptiles known at the time, and they still are.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
They're awesome creatures, and that's what dinosaurs mean.
That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that about the fact that it meant more awesome instead of just scary.
Yeah, it's not that they're scary. It's that they're impressive.
All right, so we're going to wrap it up with one question that is a great question. It's not about dinosaurs. It's actually about humans.
Okay.
So why are we called Homo sapiens and not like heterosapiens? Does it have to do with like one brain or something like that?
So this is also comes back to ancient Greek and Latin. So the genus Homo, like Homo means same, hetero means different. So like homodont dentition is animals that have all the teeth look the same, like a lizard, for instance. Heterodont dentition is animals that the teeth look different. So like mammals like us, we have incisors, canines, molars. Those are different teeth.
Right.
So Homo and hominids as the human genus and family, it's like when Carl Linnaeus, the inventor of biological taxonomy, came up, he invented the name Homo sapiens in the late 1700s. And basically his only diagnosis for us as an animal was know thyself. And yeah, it is, it's the same as what we are. Sapiens means, basically thinking. Sapient things are capable of thought. So that distinguishes Homo sapiens, the group of hominids that can reason, from, the lesser apes as Linnaeus considered them. And of course, now we know that groups like chimps and gorillas are capable of some, great sociality and some higher thought. But I think everyone does agree they don't have the same level of reason and mental development that we humans do. So yeah, so we are the thinking ape, and yeah, that's Homo sapiens.
All right. Well, thank you for that explanation, even though it was kind of off topic.
Always happy to talk about biological etymology.
Yeah. So that was all the time that we have today. If you think of any questions, there are some questions still in the chat that maybe we'll get to type the answer in, but we're gonna hold off today on answering questions. If you ever think of more questions, you can always email us at outreach@naturalsciences.org. And thank you, Christian, so much for sharing the news with us and answering all of our questions. And thank you guys for joining us today. We hope you have a great day.
Yeah, have a great day, everybody. Stay safe out there.
Yeah. Bye.